It may surprise you to know about the prophetic vision connecting Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, and Emperor Constantine. This video explores the 7th chapter of the book of the prophet Daniel, peace be on him, delving into historical events and their interpretations. Join us as we journey through the visions of Daniel, the rise of the Roman Empire, and the impact of Constantine on Christianity. Witness the dramatic changes in law and times, and the persecution of Unitarians, culminating in a deep reflective conclusion. In it, great events in the history of mankind which succeed each other within a period of more than 1,000 years are represented by the figures of 4 formidable monsters in a prophetic vision to Daniel. 4 winds of heaven were roaring against the great sea. The first beast that comes out from the deep sea is a winged lion. Then comes forth the second beast in the shape of a bear holding 3 ribs between its teeth. This is succeeded by the third terrible beast in the form of a tiger having 4 wings and 4 heads. The fourth beast, which is more formidable and ferocious than the former ones, is a monster with 10 horns upon its head and has iron teeth in its mouth. Then a little horn shoots up amidst the others, before which 3 horns break down. Behold, human eyes and mouth appear upon this horn, and it begins to speak great things against the Most High. Suddenly, in the midst of the firmament, the vision of the Eternal is seen amidst a resplendent light, seated upon his tribune of the flames of light, whose wheels were of shining light. A river of light is flowing and going forth before him, and millions of celestial beings are worshipping him, and tens of thousands of them are standing before him. The judgment court is, as it were, holding its extraordinary session. The books are opened. The body of the beast is burnt with fire, but the blaspheming horn is left alive until a Barnasher, that is, a son of man, is taken up on the clouds and presented to the Eternal, from whom he receives power, honor, and kingdom forever. The stupefied prophet approaches one of those standing by and beseeches him to explain the meaning of this wonderful vision. The good angel gives the interpretation of it in such a manner that the whole mystery, enveloped in the figurative or allegorical language and image, is brought to light. Being a prince of the royal family, Daniel was taken, together with 3 other Jewish youths, to the palace of the king of Babylon, where he was educated in all the knowledge of the Chaldeans. He lived there until the Persian conquest and the fall of the Babylonian Empire. He prophesied under Nebuchadnezzar as well as under Darius. The biblical critics do not ascribe the authorship of the entire book to Daniel, who lived and died at least a couple of centuries before the Greek conquest, which he mentions under the name of Yavan, Ionia. The first 8 chapters, if I'm not mistaken, are written in the Chaldean and the latter portion in the Hebrew. For our immediate purpose, it is not so much the date and the authorship of the book that forms the important question as the actual fulfillment of the prophecy contained in the Septuagint version, which was made some 3 centuries before the Christian era. According to the interpretation by the angel, each one of the 4 beasts represents an empire. The eagle-winged lion signifies the Chaldean Empire, which was mighty and rapid like an eagle to pounce upon the enemy. The bear represents the Madai Paris, or the Medo-Persian Empire, which extended its conquests as far as the Adriatic Sea and Ethiopia, thus holding with its teeth a rib from the body of each one of the 3 continents of the Eastern Hemisphere. The third beast, from its tigerish nature of swift bounds and fierceness, typifies the triumphant marches of Alexander the Great, whose vast empire was, after his death, divided into 4 kingdoms. But the angel who interprets the vision does not stop to explain with details the first 3 kingdoms as he does when he comes to the 4th beast. Here he enters with emphasis into details. Here the scene in the vision is magnified. The beast is practically a monster and a huge demon. This is the formidable Roman Empire. The 10 horns are the 10 emperors of Rome who persecuted the early Christians. Turn the pages of any church history for the first 3 centuries, down to the time of the so-called conversion of Constantine the Great, and you will read nothing but the horrors of the famous 10 persecutions. So far, all these 4 beasts represent the power of darkness, namely the kingdom of Satan, idolatry. In this connection, let me divert your attention to a luminous truth embodied in that particularly important article of the faith of Islam. The good and evil are from Allah. It will be remembered that the old Persians believed in a duality of gods, or in other words, the principle of good and light, and the other, the principle of evil and darkness, and that these eternal beings were eternal enemies. It will be observed that among the four beasts, the Persian power is represented by the figure of a bear, less ferocious than and not so carnivorous as the other three. And what is more, inasmuch as it can roam upon its hind legs, it resembles man, at least from some distance. In all the Christian theological and religious literature I have read, I've never met with a single statement of phrase similar to this article of the Muslim faith. God is the real author of good and evil. This article of the Muslim faith, as the contrary, is extremely repugnant to the Christian religion and a source of hatred against the religion of Islam. Yet this very doctrine is explicitly announced by God to Cyrus, whom he calls his Christ. He wants Cyrus to know that there is no God besides him, and declares, "I am the fashioner of the light and the creator of the darkness, the maker of peace and the creator of evil. I am the Lord who does all these." Isa 1:7. That God is the author of evil as well as of good is not in the least repulsive to the idea of God's goodness. The very denial of it is opposed to the absolute oneness of the Almighty. Besides, what we term or understand as evil only affects the created beings, and it is for the development and the improvement of the creatures. It has not in the least any effect on God. Now let us examine and find out who the little horn is. Having once definitely ascertained the identity of this 11th king, the identity of the Bar Nasha will be settled per se. The little horn springs up after the 10 persecutions under the reigns of the emperors of the Roman power. The empire was writhing under 4 rivals, Constantine being one of them. They were all struggling for the purple. The other 3 died or fell in battle, and Constantine was left alone as the supreme sovereign of the vast empire. The earlier Christian commentators have in vain labored to identify this ugly little horn with the Antichrist, with the Pope of Rome by Protestants, and with the establisher of Islam. God forbid. But the later biblical critics are at a loss to solve the problem of the 4th beast, which they wish to identify with the Greek Empire, and the little horn with Antiochus. Some of the critics, like Carpenter, consider the Medo-Persian power as 2 separate kingdoms. But this empire was not more than 2 than the late Austro-Hungarian Empire was. The explorations carried on by the scientific mission of the French savant, Monsieur Morgan, in Shushan, Susa, and elsewhere leave no doubt on this point. The 4th beast can therefore be no other than the old Roman world. To show that the little horn is no other than Constantine the Great, the following arguments can safely be advanced. He overcame Maximian and the other 2 rivals and assumed the purple and put an end to the persecution of Christianity. Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is, I think, the best history that can instruct us about those times. You can never invent 4 rivals after the 10 persecutions of the Church, other than Constantine and his enemies who fell before him, like the 3 horns that fell before the little one. All the 4 beasts are represented in the vision as irrational brutes, but the little horn possessed a human mouth and eyes, which is, in other words, the description of a hideous monster endowed with reason and speech. He proclaimed Christianity as the true religion, left Rome to the Pope, and made Byzantium, which was named Constantinople, the seat of the empire. He pretended to profess Christianity, but was never baptized till a little before his death, and even this is a disputed question. The legend that his conversion was due to the vision of the cross in the sky has long since, like the account about Jesus Christ inserted in the Antiquities of Josephus, been exploded as another piece of forgery. The enmity of the beasts to the believers in God was brutal and savage, but that of the rational horn was diabolical and malignant. This enmity was most noxious and harmful to the religion because it was directed to pervert the truth and the faith. All the previous attacks of the 4 empires were pagan. They persecuted and oppressed the believers, but could not pervert the truth and the faith. It was this Constantine who entered in the fold of Jesus in the shape of a believer and in the clothes of a sheep, but inwardly he was not a true believer at all. How poisonous and pernicious this enmity was will be seen from the following. The Horn Emperor speaks big things or great words against the Most High. To speak blasphemous words about God, to associate with him other creatures, and to ascribe to him foolish names and attributes, such as the begetter and begotten, birth and procession of the second and the third person, unity in the Trinity and incarnation, is to deny his oneness. Ever since the day when God revealed to Abraham in Ur of the Chaldees, until the creed and the acts of the Council of Nicea were proclaimed and enforced by an imperial edict of Constantine, amidst the horror and protests of 3/4 of the true believing members in AD 325, never has the oneness of God so officially and openly been profaned by those who pretended to be his people as Constantine and his gang of the unbelieving ecclesiastic. In the first article of this series, I have shown the error of the churches concerning God and his attributes. I need not enter into this unpleasant subject again, for it gives me great pain and grief when I see a holy prophet and a Holy Spirit, both God's noble creatures, associated with him by those who ought to know better. If Brahma and Osiris, or if Jupiter and Vesta were associated with God, we would simply consider this to be a pagan belief. But when we see Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth, and one of the millions of the Holy Spirits in the service of the Eternal, raised equal to the dignity of God, we cannot find a name for those who so believe other than what the Muslims have always been obliged to use, the epithet Gawun, the deviators. Now, since this hideous horn speaking great words, uttering blasphemies against God, is a king, as the angel reveals it to Daniel, and since the king was the 11th of the Caesars who reigned in Rome and persecuted the people of God, he cannot be other than Constantine, because it was his edict that proclaimed the belief in the Trinity of persons in the deity, a creed which the Old Testament is a living document to condemn as blasphemy, and which both the Jews and Muslims abhor. If it is other than Constantine, then the question arises, who is he? He has already come and gone, and not an impostor or the Antichrist hereafter to appear, that we may be unable to know and identify. If we do not admit that the horn in question has come already, then how are we to interpret the four beasts? The first of which is certainly the Chaldean Empire, the second the Medo-Persian, and so forth. If the fourth beast does not represent the Roman Empire, how can we interpret the third with its 4 heads as the Empire of Alexander, split into 4 kingdoms after his death? Is there any other power succeeding the Greek Empire before the Roman Empire, with its 10 potentates persecuting the believers in God? Sophistry and illusion are of no use. The little horn is decidedly Constantine, even if we may deny the prophecy of Daniel. It is immaterial whether a prophet, priests, or a sorcerer wrote the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel. One thing is certain, that its predictions and descriptions of the events, some 24 centuries ago, are found to be exact, true, and have been fulfilled in the person of Constantine the Great, whom the Church of Rome has always very wisely abstained from beatifying as a saint, as the Greek Church has done. Not only does the little horn, which grew into something of a more formidable vision than the rest, speak impious words against the Most High, but also it wages war against the saints of the Most High and vanquishes them. In the eyes of a Hebrew prophet, the people who believed in one God was a separate and holy people. Now, it is indisputably true that Constantine persecuted those Christians who, like the Jews, believed in the absolute oneness of God and courageously declared the Trinity to be a false and erroneous conception of the deity. More than 1,000 ecclesiastics were summoned to the General Council at Nicea, of whom only 318 persons subscribed to the decisions of the Council, and these two formed 3 opposite factions with their respective ambiguous and unholy expressions of homoousion or homoousion, consubstantial and other terms utterly and wholly strangers to the prophets of Israel, but only worthy of the speaking horn. The Christians who suffered persecutions and martyrdoms under the pagan emperors of Rome because they believed in one God and in his worshipper prophet Jesus were now doomed by the imperial edict of the Christian Constantine to even severer tortures because they refused to adore the prophet Jesus as consubstantial and coeval with his Lord and Creator. the elders and ministers of the Aryan Creed, that is Kashishi and Mishamshani, as they were called by the early Jewish Christians, were deposed or banished, their religious books suppressed, and their churches seized and handed over to the Trinitarian bishops and priests. Any historical work on the early Christian church will give us ample information about the service rendered by Constantine to the cause of the Trinitarian Creed and tyranny to those who opposed it. The merciless legions in every province were placed at the disposal of the ecclesiastical authorities. Constantine personifies a regime of terror and fierce war against the Unitarians, which lasted in the East for 3 centuries and a half, until when the Muslims established the religion of Allah and assumed the power and dominion over the lands trodden and devastated by the 4 beasts. The talking horn is accused of having contemplated to change the law and the times. This is a very serious charge against the horn. Its blasphemies or great words against the Most High may or may not affect other people, but to change the law of God and the established holy days or festivals would naturally subvert the religion altogether. The first 2 commandments of the law of Moses concerning the absolute oneness of God, thou shalt have no other gods besides me, and the strict prohibition of making images and statues for worship were directly violated and abrogated by the Edict of Constantine. To proclaim 3 personal beings in the deity and to confess that the Eternal Almighty was conceived and born of the Virgin Mary is the greatest insult to the law of God and the grossest idolatry. To make a golden or wooden image for worship is abominable enough, but to make a mortal an object of worship, declare him God, and even adore the bread and the wine of the Eucharist as the body and blood of God is an impious blasphemy. Then to every righteous Jew and to a prophet like Daniel, who from his youth was a most devoted observer of the Mosaic law, what could be more repugnant than the substitution of the Easter for the Paschal Lamb of the great feast of the Passover, and the sacrifice of the Lamb of God upon the cross, and upon thousands of altars every day? The abrogation of the Sabbath day was a direct violation of the 4th command of the Decalogue, and the institution of Sunday instead was as arbitrary as it is inimical. True, the Quran abrogated the Sabbath day not because the Friday was a holier day, but simply because the Jews made an abuse of it by declaring that God, after the labor of 6 days, reposed on the 7th day, as if he were man and was fatigued. Prophet Muhammad would have destroyed any day or object, however holy or sacred, if it were made an object of worship intending to deal a blow or injury to God's greatness and glory. But the abrogation of the Sabbath by the decree of Constantine was for the institution of the Sunday on which Jesus is alleged to have risen from the sepulchre. Jesus himself was a strict observer of the Sabbath day and reprimanded the Jewish leaders for their objection to his doing the deeds of charity on it. The horn was allowed to make war against the saints of the Most High for a period of some 3 centuries and a half. It only weakened them, made them languid, but could not extinguish and entirely root them out. The Arians, who believed in one God alone, sometimes, for example, under the reign of Constantius, the son of Constantine, of Julian and others who were more tolerant, strongly defended themselves and fought for the cause of their faith. The next important point in this wonderful vision is to identify the Bar Nasha, or the Son of Man who destroyed the horn.